Tonight we step quietly into a land where the rain falls sideways, the grass seems to whisper secrets, and the roads, straight and suspiciously advanced, don't belong to the locals. It's Roman Britain somewhere around 60 CE, and while everything may look calm under the grey skies, that calm is about to crack like cheap pottery in a chariot crash. You're here just in time for one of history's more underrated cautionary tales, when an empire pushed too far and a queen pushed back harder. You're surrounded by dense forests and low-lying hills dotted with thatched roof roundhouses. The Romans have been in Britain for about 2 decades now, long enough to build roads and bathhouses, but not long enough to be loved. They're outsiders and everyone knows it. You pass by towns where Roman legions patrol in gleaming armor, but they don't look entirely relaxed. There's a simmer in the air. The locals, mostly Celtic tribes like the Trinovantes and the Iceni, have made grudging peace with the empire, but that peace is held together with taxes, threats, and just enough flattery to keep rebellion from boiling over. Tonight's tale begins just before all that flattery snaps. The Iceni tribe, living in what's now East Anglia, have had their own king Prasutagus, who thought he could play nice with Rome. When he died, he left his wealth, jointly, to his daughters and the Roman Emperor Nero, which in his mind probably meant we'll all get along, but to the Romans it meant thanks for the gift, now get out. They moved in, seized everything, flogged his widow, and, deep breath, publicly assaulted his daughters. You probably won't survive this if you're expecting a just empire. This was the moment the delicate peace shattered. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your local time and where you're listening from. I love seeing how far these sleepy journeys travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You follow the wind through the fields where the spirits of the tribes still whisper. Something's stirring. Boudica. The late king's wife is no passive widow. She's tall, striking with long copper-red hair, falling like fire down her back, and eyes that, according to one Roman source, blazed like fury. She's not interested in petitions or parades. She wants retribution, and not just for herself, but for everyone Rome has insulted, taxed, or brutalized. Now historians still argue whether she was truly chosen by the Iceni as their war leader, or if she seized power during the chaos. What's certain is that she didn't just stew in her anger, she turned it into motion. One by one, she begins visiting other tribes, rekindling old alliances. Word spreads the queen has declared war. Not politics, not negotiation, war. But before swords are drawn, something else cracks first trust. The Roman administration in Britain is caught completely off guard. Governor Suetonius Paulinus is hundreds of miles away in Wales, too busy smashing sacred druid groves on the island of Mona modern Anglesey to notice a storm is brewing in the east. The druids, by the way, were the spiritual lifeblood of Celtic resistance. Rome hated them, and cutting them down felt like cutting out the heart of tribal Britain. Ironically, in doing so, Paulinus may have awakened something even more dangerous, Boudica. You hear the drums before you see the army. Makeshift war bands are gathering under Celtic standards, each painted with snarling beasts, suns and serpents. And don't let Hollywood fool you, they didn't all wear animal skins and scream into battle. Some did, sure, but many were hardened warriors familiar with Roman tactics, just waiting for a cause. Now they have one. Here's your fringe tidbit for the night. Some legends claim the Druids foretold the uprising in bloody prophecies and celestial signs. One tale tells of the statue of the goddess Victory in Londinium falling over without warning, while a phantom woman screamed through the streets, predicting doom. Eerie, yes. Verified, no. But it makes for some very dramatic bedtime atmosphere. You find yourself riding with a group of rebels heading toward Camulodunum modern Colchester, once the Roman capital of Britain. It's a sitting duck. The Romans, thinking themselves secure, built a massive temple to Emperor Claudius right in the town centre, rubbing it in like salt in a tribal wound. Locals were forced to fund it. Even the garrison stationed there is small, unfortified, and honestly kinda smug. By the time the rebels arrive, there's panic. The few soldiers attempt to barricade themselves in the temple, hoping foolishly that it'll protect them like some kind of imperial panic room. It doesn't. The temple burns, the town burns. Everything goes up in flames. You stand in the smoke, surrounded by cheering warriors, and you wonder, is this revenge or the beginning of something much bigger? The Romans send for help, but it's too late. Boudica is no longer a tribal queen. She's the living symbol of Celtic resistance. Her army swells to over 100,000, though historians debate that number. It could be exaggerated. Ancient chroniclers loved big scary numbers, but even at half that, it's a massive force. You wake with the taste of ash still in the air and the scent of scorched timber drifting on the morning wind. Camulodunum is no more. Its ruins smoulder behind you like a cautionary tale whispered in Latin. As you trudge eastward through the churned-up earth, your companions are no longer just warriors, they're believers. Boudica rides at the head of the army, a vision out of myth. Her chariot rattles over the ground, her daughters beside her, and every eye that lands on her finds courage in its sockets. You may have expected a woman bruised by grief, weighed down by trauma, but the Boudica you see is something else, unyielding, electric, carried not only by vengeance, but by a wild tectonic force that makes the earth feel uneasy beneath her wheels. She doesn't lead from behind walls. She rides into villages herself, speaking in the old tongue, invoking the gods, raising clenched fists toward the sky. And as she rides, the ranks swell. The Trinovantes join, the Catuvelauni stir. Even tribes who once quarreled over sheep and rivers are setting aside rivalries. This is something rare, unity. You're in the midst of a tribal army that doesn't behave like an imperial one. It moves in pulses, families, priests, singers, smiths, all flowing with the warriors. Not just a marching force, but a moving people. Women fight, children carry spears, old men chant battle prayers in trembling tones. You realize this is not merely a war, it's a social revolt, a cultural detonation. They're not just trying to kill Romans, they're trying to reclaim a world Rome is burying under roads and taxes. Now here's something odd to picture. By candlelight as they pass through the countryside, Boudica's forces sometimes dig up Roman boundary stones and plant tribal totems in their place. One tale even claims they sacrificed a Roman eagle standard on a makeshift altar of ox bones. Historians still argue whether such rituals actually happened, or whether later writers embroidered them to make the Celts seem more pagan and dramatic. Either way, the symbolism is delicious. The next Roman target isn't a fortress, it's a memory. Verulamium, a Romanized town with Celtic roots, has become a symbol of what Rome expects from its subjects: cooperation, taxation, silent obedience. But in Boudica's world, silent obedience gets you trampled. So you go with them through woods echoing with horns and the rustle of branches toward a town too civilized to defend itself. Romanized Britons flee before the army even arrives. A few beg for mercy. Most just vanish. The town falls fast, its granaries pillaged, its villas reduced to rubble. The rebels torch the Roman-style forums, letting flames lick the mosaic floors until they curl and blacken like dried leaves. Verulamium's golden age ends not with a whimper, but a scream you hear from across the fields. And still, no Roman legions in sight. You wonder, is Rome even awake? The answer, somewhere deep in a Welsh mountain pass, is sort of. Governor Paulinus is finishing his druidic extermination on Mona, probably congratulating himself for crushing resistance, before realizing too late that the resistance has taken root elsewhere. He receives frantic messages, towns, falling temples, burning Roman colonists, begging for ships to escape. One missive supposedly claims that if he doesn't return soon, there won't be a province left to govern. He doesn't even take time to finish his punitive campaign. He turns back, fast-marching his legions eastward with the kind of urgency usually reserved for fires, floods, or angry emperors. While Paulinus panics, Boudica pushes forward, and now your boots tread closer to Londinium. Yes, that Londinium. Today it's called London, but back then it was just a young trading post with dreams of marble and empire. Not quite a city yet, but growing strategically important, sitting on the north bank of the Thames. When Boudica approaches, the town doesn't even have real walls. Rome never thought it needed them. You stand on the wooden bridge, spanning the river, watching refugees pour in from the north. Roman citizens, merchants, and even loyalist Britons all squeeze into the tiny forum, hoping the governor will protect them. When Paulinus finally arrives, battle-hardened, cold-eyed, he surveys the situation, takes one look at the chaos and says something that roughly translates to, "Yeah, no." He orders the evacuation of anyone who can move, packs up his soldiers, and abandons the city. This is your first glimpse of what cold Roman calculus looks like. Paulinus knows he can't save everything, so he chooses what he thinks he can win. Londinium is sacrificed. Boudica enters the city with thunder in her wake. The rebels sweep through like a tide. Some sources claim they spared no one, Romans, loyalists, even children. Others suggest that they let some live, or at least tried to make examples only of the most complicit. Either way, the smoke rises, the bridge burns, temples collapse. Roman law, written so proudly in scrolls and edicts, curls into cinders before your eyes. And here's your fringe detail to keep you company as you lie back. Some versions of the tale say Boudica stood in the forum before the ruins of a half-built basilica and gave a speech invoking Andraste, the warrior goddess, calling down vengeance on Rome, with language so fiery a few birds reportedly dropped dead mid-flight. Real hard to say, but dramatic absolutely. At this point, the math is startling. 3 major Roman settlements have been annihilated, tens of thousands are dead. Boudica's army may number more than 120,000, and still no decisive battle has occurred. It's like watching an avalanche build while everyone below is still debating the weather. But the avalanche can't roll forever. You begin to feel it, a weight in the air, like a coin held over a flame. The Romans are regrouping, and they're angry. Still, Boudica doesn't flinch. She knows the counterattack is coming. But for now, the queen stands tall above the ashes of Rome's ambition in Britain, her daughters beside her, her people behind her. This is her moment, and it burns brighter than the city she's just turned to smoke. You walk in the long shadows of dawn, the dew not yet dried from the grass beneath your feet, and there's a hush in the air that no victory can muffle. The army is still growing, swollen with new recruits, ragged survivors of Roman cruelty, and those who simply refuse to live under a boot any longer. But something about the way they march has changed, less celebratory, more deliberate, as if they all know what's waiting on the other side of this high. Boudica rides near the front, still upright and fierce, her daughters clinging to the chariot rails with practiced ease. Her voice, when it comes, is steady calm. She speaks of strength, of the gods' favor, of freedom and memory. But she doesn't promise easy victory anymore. Even she knows that the Romans, once wounded, are never content to bleed. They strike back like a bear robbed of its cubs. You pass through what was once open countryside, now carved with scorched furrows from wagons' hooves and iron-shod wheels. The supply lines are stretched. The rebels loot what they can, but it's not like Rome's tidy, organized military logistics. Food is foraged or taken. Weapons are scavenged from fallen Romans. Armor is mismatched. Some men wear nothing but trousers and blue war paint. And yet somehow it works, for now. You pass a village where Roman tax collectors were once stationed. Their tall stone house is gone, flattened to its foundation. Local women tell stories of how those officials measured grain, not by fairness, but by bribes, and of how Boudica's arrival felt like the breaking of a curse. There's singing that night, raw, broken voices raised in a language the Romans never bothered to learn. The sound doesn't lull you, it stirs you. Still tensions ripple. Some tribal leaders argue about direction, about timing, about whether the next move should be battle or retreat. They're not used to unity. This rebellion is fragile, glorious, but held together by vision, not structure. There are no written orders, no standard formations. It's instinct, fire, momentum. And then, like a whispered dare, comes the rumor Paulinus is back. The Roman general has returned his legions trailing behind him like the teeth of a coming storm. He's brought the 14th Gemina and XX Valeria Victrix legions, battle-tested veterans with cold eyes and colder hearts. And unlike the Roman settlers, these men know how to fight. You hear Paulinus is moving northward, choosing the battleground carefully. He wants terrain where his smaller force can hold the line, where rebel numbers won't mean much. Historians still argue where exactly this happened. Some say near Mansetta, others point to Watling Street. The truth is, no one knows the exact spot, but it doesn't matter. You're going there now like iron filings drawn to a lodestone. On the way you pass looted Roman caravans, smashed amphorae leaking wine into the dirt coins scattered like forgotten prayers. A child picks one up and squints. What good is a coin if the empire behind it is crumbling? Someone says the Emperor Nero considered abandoning the entire province. Others say he just demanded Paulinus fix things before Rome looked weak. Either way you sense it, this fight won't be over ashes, will be over legitimacy. The countryside feels like it's holding its breath. The birdsong is thin. The grass grows uneven and battered. You pass fields where small skirmishes were fought days earlier, rebels testing the Roman line only to be pushed back with brutal efficiency. These weren't like the sacking of cities, these were warnings. Here's your quirky bit. For the night, some rebel warriors paint their faces not with war paint, but with crushed beetles using their iridescent shells to give their skin an eerie shimmer under the sun. It's meant to confuse enemies or perhaps just make them seem otherworldly in battle. Roman chroniclers probably didn't know what to make of it, and you suspect that was the point. But now, the rebellion slows. Not because it's failing, but because the stakes are different. This next battle, this one will decide whether the rebellion ends with Boudica crowned a liberator or remembered as a warning. The warriors around you prepare. Spears are straightened blades, sharpened shields carved with spirals, and animals meant to terrify. Songs are sung again, but this time more softly. Like prayers, not chants. Boudica climbs a ridge the night before the battle and surveys the land. The rebel carts are parked behind the army in a great crescent meant to hem everyone in. A mobile camp, yes, but also a trap if things go badly. You look into her face, and for a moment she looks not like a queen, but a mother, a widow, a woman staring at fate unblinking. She gives no sign of retreat, no plea for mercy. If the Romans want to reclaim their empire, they'll have to walk through her. The wind shifts again, not a breeze now, but a sharpened edge that slices through the grass and rattles your bones. You stand on the cusp of something massive, where fate feels like a physical weight pressing down on your shoulders. Around you, thousands of Celtic warriors gather in ranks more symbolic than strategic, arranged in wide arcs behind wagons, carts, and clustered families. It's a battle line drawn with hope and outrage, not logistics. You've arrived at Londinium's reckoning, but you already know this city won't survive the morning. Londinium was never meant to be a fortress. It was a merchant's dream river access, tidy little Roman grids and a fledgling temple or two. Just a few decades earlier, it had barely been a settlement. Now it's something like a promise. Rome's gateway to the Thames, its toehold in the messy, misty wilds of Britain. But there are no walls, no garrison capable of facing what's coming. Just a few nervous defenders and some unlucky civilians who didn't make it out in time. You arrive at the edge of the city with Boudica's column, and it's astonishing how quiet it is. Not the silence of diplomacy or hesitation, but the kind that precedes a landslide. The Celtic banners rise like seaweed on a rising tide. You smell smoke already, even before the fires start. Someone next to you mutters a prayer to Andraste. Another just sharpens a blade made from repurposed Roman iron. Vengeance wears many faces today. Boudica doesn't need a horn to signal the charge. The order spreads like wildfire whispers, turning to shouts, shouts to roars. The rebels sweep into Londinium like a living wave, breaking down its half-built structures, tearing through streets laid too recently to be loved. The Romans had left it defenseless, and now the city will pay for their arrogance. What follows is a chaos so total that even the crows seem uncertain where to land. Temples are desecrated, storehouses are emptied and torched. The market stalls become barricades, then bonfires. Some residents fight back, but most flee or try to. You hear stories afterward of a Roman merchant who tried to buy his way out and was smothered with the very coins he offered, of a baker who fed both sides and was spared, then killed anyway, by someone who didn't get a loaf. Historians still argue whether these tales are true, exaggerated, or invented by Roman propagandists to paint the Celts as indiscriminate savages. You suspect the truth is somewhere between horror and heartbreak. Here's a fringe detail to carry with you into sleep. Legend says a Roman noblewoman buried her jewelry under her villa just before the sacking, hoping to return and reclaim it. Her treasure, gold rings, hairpins, a delicate brooch, was found centuries later during construction near St. Paul's. No one knows her name, but her panic is still glinting in museum glass. By midday, Londinium is a city only by map. Smoke shrouds the sky. The once orderly Roman streets now form a shattered maze of embers and limbs. And somewhere amid the ruin, Boudica walks alone, quiet just for a moment. Her daughters trail behind her, soot-streaked and silent. This victory tastes different than the last. Bigger, yes, but heavier. Still, she shows no sign of stopping. The Romans are retreating. Paulinus has gone, choosing to reign over civilians. Every village burned, every city razed, sends a louder message: we do not accept your empire. We were never yours to own. But the cost, oh the cost! You see it in the eyes of rebel fighters who've watched children die in the crossfire, who've lost friends in the frenzy. The line between liberation and devastation is narrowing. Some begin to wonder, when this is over, what comes next? Is there a future beyond this fire? For now, that question remains unanswered. The momentum still drives the rebellion forward. Verulamium is next another Romanized settlement, another symbol of submission. Boudica's army moves like a migrating storm, thunderclouds growing darker with each mile. By the time you arrive at the city's edge, the defenders have already begun to pray. And here you witness something surreal as the Celts approach. The Romans try to negotiate. A desperate governor offers a surrender deal: partial taxation, tribal autonomy, shared governance. It's the kind of bargain Rome never usually entertains. But Boudica isn't interested. She doesn't want terms, she wants removal. Rome must leave or burn. Verulamium burns. And just like that, 3 of Rome's most important settlements in Britain lie in ruins. Tens of thousands are dead. The financial cost is astronomical, the emotional cost even greater. Word reaches Rome that Britain is on the verge of total collapse. Nero, on his gilded throne in the palaces of the Palatine Hill, reportedly considers withdrawal. An entire province lost to a woman with a chariot and a cause. But Paulinus won't let that happen, not if he can help it. He sends scouts, fast riders, who trail the rebellion's movements and report back with chilling speed. His troops, disciplined, professional, and few, are now strategically positioned. He knows Boudica must confront him eventually. He just needs the right ground. And now you find yourself marching again past fields turned to ash, along roads paved with fear, toward a confrontation that will determine whether Britain remains Roman or becomes legend. You glance behind you. Smoke still rises from Londinium, but it no longer smells like victory. It smells like inevitability. You trudge forward on a road Rome built, Watling Street, cold and stubborn, slicing across the land like an imperial scar, and your boots crunch against gravel laid by soldiers who are likely already dead. The rebellion has marched far. 3 cities lie in ruin behind you. Smoke drifts lazily over the low hills, but the high spirits of the early uprising have settled into something harder, something less lyrical. The warriors around you are no longer singing, they're sharpening. Paulinus has chosen his ground. He's positioned his legions in a narrow defile, steep woods at their back, flanked by rising terrain, open ground in front. You walk the last miles toward it, and even you can tell this is perfect Roman terrain. It cancels the enemy's advantage in numbers. It neutralizes the risk of encirclement. It's not just strategy, it's geometry. Boudica knows it too. You ride beside her chariot now, and she speaks less than before. There's nothing uncertain in her face, but there's calculation in her silence. She sees the trap. She rides along the lines and tells the warriors, "We outnumber them many times over. They cannot escape. They will not leave this field alive." Her words ignite cheers, but even you feel it, something sharp, something off. And then preparations. The rebel wagons filled with families and supplies are arranged in a huge semicircle at the rear of the field. It's a wall, a symbol of victory before it's even won, and it boxes the army in one entrance forward, no retreat behind. Historians still argue whether this was a ceremonial flourish or a disastrous tactical error. Whatever the intent, it will become a prison if the battle turns. Across the clearing, Paulinus's legions wait in silence. You see them now, around 10,000 men, dwarfed by the rebel horde, but gleaming, coiled like steel snakes. Formations, tight shields, locked pillar, stacked and ready. You almost admire them, machines of discipline under a cold-eyed governor who has no time for panic, only victory or obliteration. And now it begins, but not with swords, with words. Boudica rides into view and delivers her speech. It's fiery, poetic, furious. She speaks not only of vengeance, but of memory, of her daughters, of the humiliation Rome brought to her tribe and her people. She invokes the gods, Andraste, the protector. She reminds them that freedom is worth more than life under Roman chains. Roman chroniclers later twist her speech into caricature, but even they admit she spoke like someone who knew how to burn herself into legend. Here's your quirky detail to drift off with some. Say Boudica released a hair from her cloak before the charge, a kind of Celtic divination. When the hair darted toward the Roman right, the Druids took it as an omen of victory. Historians debate whether this actually happened, or if it was a Roman embellishment to make Celtic spirituality seem quaint. Either way, the hair had better instincts than most generals. And then the charge. A wave of humanity surges forward, tens of thousands screaming, howling, stomping the earth like a thunderclap. You are in the heart of it, shoulder to shoulder with warriors who have never feared a Roman face, and you run with them. The dust kicks up, the ground shakes, but the Romans, they don't move. They wait. And just before contact, the pillar fly. Roman javelins arc into the air and plunge into the charging ranks with horrific precision. Horses scream, men fall. The wave buckles slightly but keeps coming. Then a second volley, then a third. By the time the front line crashes into the Roman wall of shields, it's already fractured. And the Romans begin their dance. This isn't chaos, it's choreography. The legionaries stab in tight formation shields, locked rotating lines like clockwork. You watch it happen, wedge formations, piercing into the mass, scything paths through the screaming horde. The Celts fight back, yes, with all the fury of thunder, but their swings are wide, their formations loose, their numbers become a hindrance. There's no room to maneuver, no way to flank, and nowhere to retreat. The rebel forces try to regroup, to overwhelm one side, but Paulinus unleashes the cavalry. Horses crash through the flanks, the Celts are herded backward, straight into the wall of their own wagons. You hear the panic rise, you smell it thick and bitter. The front can't move forward, the back can't escape, they're trapped. It's not a battle anymore, it's a slaughter. You try to push through the press of bodies. Someone screams for the gates to be opened. There are no gates. Others try to climb the carts, only to be dragged down in the crush. You see a man throw down his sword and claw at the earth like it might open for him. The Romans are merciless, advancing like a tide of blades. And then you spot her, Boudica, still in her chariot blood, on her cheek, eyes burning. She doesn't run, she doesn't scream. She simply watches one daughter behind her, sobbing into her shoulder. She pulls the reins tight and turns the chariot slowly away from the carnage. What happens next, no one truly knows. Some say she fled and later drank poison. Others claim she died from illness. Still others believe she fell in battle, her body never recovered. Historians still argue over her fate. Some think her story was too inconvenient to record fully. Others think Rome erased her as a final insult. But what's certain is this: the battle ends with thousands of Celts dead, the rebellion crushed in one ruthless afternoon. Paulinus surveys the field, silent, efficient. He has saved the province. But the land smells of ghosts now. You don't walk off that battlefield so much as float away from it numb, half reel your ears, still ringing from the final clash of shield against spear. The sun is dipping low over scorched grass and crows have begun to gather. The rebel carts that once stood like proud barriers are now twisted monuments to what might have been. All around you, the aftermath spreads like spilled ink bodies piled in grotesque contortions, weapons scattered like broken promises, and silence, profound, unnatural silence. The battle is over, but the war has just begun to echo. You wander past what remains of the rebel dead, and already the Romans are beginning their cold arithmetic. Paulinus doesn't waste time with speeches. His orders are practical. Bury the legions, burn, the rebels rebuild the province. You notice how little satisfaction he shows. This wasn't a glorious victory, it was a necessary one, and that makes it colder. He doesn't celebrate. He tightens the grip. Word travels faster than horses. Boudica is gone. Her fate is a question mark inked across every campfire tale and frightened whisper. Some say she took poison like Cleopatra. Others say she escaped to the east, her chariot swallowed by fog and time. You'll hear versions of her death for centuries, and they all carry the same ache. She was too fierce to be forgotten, too dangerous to be left behind, too symbolic to be allowed a proper ending. But now the rebellion is officially extinguished. Rome remains. And yet things feel different. You return to Londinium, or what's left of it. The city is trying to rise from its ashes, but nothing comes easy. The smell of fire is baked into the soil. Rebuilding begins not with joy, but with dread. The Roman settlers return hesitantly, as if expecting ghosts around every corner. And Paulinus. His policies become even harsher. He cracks down on the tribes, punishes entire communities, strips lands from families who so much as blinked at the rebellion. Reprisals are swift and wide-reaching. It's effective, but also a public relations disaster. The province is tense. The air feels brittle. Enter Gaius Julius Alpinus Classicianus, Rome's new procurator in Britain. Yes, that name's a mouthful, and no, he's not here for battle, he's here to clean up. He arrives with orders not to crush Britain further, but to soothe it. A rare Roman move, soft diplomacy. You find it strange, seeing governors argue not about conquest but compassion. Classicianus criticizes Paulinus, openly sending reports to Nero that the governor's brutality is inflaming rather than pacifying. And it works. Paulinus is recalled to Rome. Disgraced, just gently rotated out. The message is clear. Boudica's rebellion wasn't just a military threat. It was a crisis of legitimacy. Rome can conquer, yes, but can it keep what it conquers? Here's a lesser-known tidbit for your nightlight thoughts. Classicianus is buried in London, and his tombstone was later found intact, stone-carved Latin, and all during construction in the 1800s. It's now in the British Museum, quietly reminding everyone that even bureaucrats have legacies. Meanwhile, the Roman Empire tries to rewrite the narrative. Boudica, once a rebel queen, is now framed as a cautionary tale. The surviving Roman texts describe her in one breath as barbaric and unnaturally clever, a woman whose power was a freak of tribal chaos. Tacitus, the Roman historian, who gives us much of what we know, was writing decades later, and even he can't quite decide if she was a savage or a symbol. Historians still argue about his motives. Was he sympathetic to her cause, quietly admiring the flame she lit? Or was he simply constructing a drama to entertain Rome's elite? Either way, we read about her through a fog of contradiction. You begin to sense something else. Though Rome remains in Britain, its footing feels shakier. Roads are still laid, forts still built, trade still flows. But the rebellion leaves a permanent crack in the marble. Trust is gone. The image of invincibility is gone. Rome now watches the tribes more carefully. Tributes are collected with more diplomacy, and soldiers think twice before provoking unrest. You walk through a village that had once sided with Boudica. It's mostly empty now. The young have fled to the hills, the elders remain silent. A Roman official rides through once a week, helmet gleaming, but he never dismounts. He doesn't need to. The fear does the work for him. And here comes your curious fringe detail for the night. Some say that Boudica's name isn't even quite right. Tacitus called her Boudica. Dio called her Boudica. Some scholars think her real name might have meant victory, or been closer to Boadicea, a later Latinized variant. Even in death, Rome reshaped her. Language, like history, is often bent by the hand that holds the pen. You sit by a river now, maybe the Stour, maybe the Lea, and you try to imagine what could have been. If the wagons hadn't blocked the retreat, if the rebellion had paused after the second city, if Boudica had lived to govern, not just to rage. But history doesn't reward what-ifs. It clutches tightly to what did happen, the fires, the screams, the speeches, the final silence. Still you hear whispers among the tribes. They say Boudica's spirit lingers, that she rides the fog in her chariot, still wheels, spinning over moonlit hills, daughters beside her eyes, fixed on the horizon. You walk through the mist that settles low across the fields, wrapping around your ankles like forgotten memory. It's peaceful now, eerily so. The war cries are gone, the clash of iron has vanished into the past, but every step feels haunted. You're crossing land that drank too much blood in too short a time. There's no signpost to mark the final battlefield, no monument carved with names, just whispers, grass, and the unsettling quiet of ground that remembers. You're backtracking the rebellion's trail now, not as a soldier or a spectator, but as something else, a witness. The type who survives the storm and carries its echo forward. Rome may think it's tied off the loose ends, swept up the ashes, but you know better. The story didn't end with the bodies on the field or the silence in the chariot. It shifted, sank underground, became legend. What surprises you is how quickly Rome tries to fill the void. Rebuilding efforts begin almost immediately. Towns that were turned to embers, Verulamium, Londinium, even the temple at Camulodunum are given new facades, new faceless governors, new slogans. The message is clear: this was a tragedy, yes, but a passing one. Business resumes. Rome never dwells long on the blood of the conquered, and yet the tribes haven't forgotten. Not the Iceni, not the Trinovantes, not the smaller bands who gave their sons to Boudica's cause. You walk among them now in the marketplaces and villages that survived, and you can feel it. The old ways are being spoken in whispers again. The stories are reshaping themselves, and Boudica's part in them is growing. She's not just the woman who burned cities anymore. She's becoming something bigger. Children carry dolls that look like chariot queens. Tribal bards sing her name in verses that were never approved by any Roman censors. A child offers you a piece of bark with a spiral carved into it, the mark of Andraste, they say, for protection. You don't dare throw it away. Here's a fringe detail that hasn't made it into the textbooks. Some rebels who escaped that final battle are said to have buried their weapons in secret forest groves, vowing that their descendants would return for them when the time came. Archaeologists have found lone spearheads in strange places on riverbanks, far from any battlefield, near trees marked with slash patterns. Ritual refuge. The truth is slippery. Back in Londinium you pass the rebuilt forums. Romans in polished togas give lectures on law economy and the virtue of civilization. They talk about the uprising like it was a storm, a bad season that passed. But under their words, under their perfumed confidence, there's something taught, something unspoken. You catch it in their eyes when they speak Boudica's name, a flinch. And here's the irony that history loves most. Paulinus may have won the battle, but he didn't win the narrative. The tribes tell it one way, the Romans try another. Tacitus writes his version years later, coloured by politics and family connections. After all, his father-in-law served in Britain. Dio Cassius, another Roman historian, pens his version 2 centuries after the fact. And still they can't quite agree. Was she a feral barbarian, a tragic mother, a queen, a mistake? Historians still argue whether Boudica's rebellion actually came close to toppling Roman rule, or whether it was always doomed a desperate burst of rage against a machine too large to break. But as you watch Roman engineers laying fresh cobblestones over the ruins of a Celtic sanctuary, you realize the answer doesn't matter. The fact that they're still patching cracks means the impact was real. Rome didn't leave Britain for almost 350 years after Boudica, but it never felt fully at ease again. Even in its most stable decades, the spectre of revolt hung in the air. Garrison towns were fortified more heavily. Roads were patrolled more frequently. The memory of that flaming arc of rebellion, those three torched cities, that tidal wave of vengeance, never really faded. Here's a strange image to leave you with. Some say Boudica's body was laid to rest under a great mound in the east, marked by no stone, guarded only by wind and moss. Others, in later centuries, believed she was buried under what is now London's King's Cross station. There's even a plaque, not official, just quietly placed, claiming she rests beneath Platform 8. Is it true? Highly unlikely. But it's a delicious thought, isn't it? A rebel queen lying beneath the comings and goings of modern Britain, her chariot buried under steel and schedules. You sit down near the Thames as the sun falls away, the water lapping quietly at the stone banks. A Roman bridge arches across the river, not the original, of course, but still claiming that legacy. Pigeons coo. A few passers-by chatter in languages Tacitus never imagined, and somewhere in the wind you hear the creak of a chariot wheel. The rebellion failed, and yet Boudica won something deeper. Not a province, but a place in time. You find yourself tracing invisible lines through the ruins, through the roads, through the stories that continue to pulse beneath Britain's polished Roman veneer. The empire may have buried Boudica's body, erased her capital, and written her rebellion off as a tragic footnote, but you, like the land itself, know better. The rebellion hasn't vanished. It's metastasized into something else. Memory, myth, the kind that Rome's straightest roads can't pave over. You pass through towns being rebuilt with the same square-cut stones, the same red-tiled roofs, and it's all so precise, so predictably Roman, but every town has shadows. People lower their voices when speaking of the past. They glance toward the forests a little longer than necessary. There's a tension you can't quite explain, the kind of tension that comes from surviving something your oppressors insist was never truly dangerous. And still the Romans dig in. Poor Linus is gone, replaced by more diplomatic administrators, men who offer more temples than torches, more bribes than floggings. They know that force alone won't keep the tribes quiet. So now they offer deals. Citizenship for loyalty, education for obedience, grain in exchange for taxes. It's a clever trick. Teach people to love the leash and they won't notice the collar. But you know Boudica's people haven't forgotten. The Iceni are now scattered and silent, but their identity has crystallized. They no longer trust the empire. They tell stories around fires where Roman ears can't hear. Children are named after fallen warriors. Women carve spirals into stone, the mark of Andraste. These acts aren't rebellion, not technically, but they are resistance. You ride past a villa where a Roman merchant once built a mosaic celebrating the taming of the province. Today it lies in fragments. Locals claim foxes dig it up every spring. You chuckle at that. Perhaps the gods are bored. Here's a quirky tidbit for your twilight imagination. During the Victorian era, some amateur scholars became so obsessed with Boudica that they insisted she had been a red-haired, proto-British heroine who defended English liberty before England even existed. They built statues of her, gave her swords she probably never carried, and installed her proud and bronze on the Thames embankment directly across from the British Parliament. You can still visit her there today. She's flanked by her daughters riding a chariot with blades on the wheels, glaring at Westminster like she knows exactly how fragile empires can be. But back in the 1st century, the real empire still reigns. Rome remains in command, but it's walking more carefully now. You overhear a Roman governor advising a centurion to smile more when collecting taxes. He says it as a joke, but it lands like strategy. Still, the damage can't be undone. Tens of thousands died in the rebellion, and even Rome's records can't agree on the numbers. Tacitus says 70,000, 80,000 Romans and allies were killed. Dio Cassius inflates the number even higher. Were they exaggerating to magnify the Roman victory? Or was it their attempt to make Boudica terrifying enough to justify their brutality? Historians still argue over the figures, and perhaps they always will. But one thing's certain, Britain bled. You visit Camulodunum again. The temple of Claudius is being rebuilt taller this time, more grand. A statement. But no one enters it without glancing over their shoulder. And the foundation stones, some of them still bear scorch marks. The city is quieter now, more Roman than ever, but less alive. And then one evening you overhear something in a village market that freezes your blood. A woman, elderly and nearly blind, tells a group of children that she once saw the Queen herself, hair like flame, voice like thunder. She rode past me, the woman whispers with eyes like the gods. The children ask, what did she say? The old woman smiles. Nothing. She just looked ahead. The memory is still alive. And you begin to wonder, what if Boudica's rebellion wasn't meant to succeed in the traditional sense? What if the goal wasn't to remove Rome, but to remind Rome that it could bleed, that its rule for all its baths and law codes rested on people who might one day decide they'd had enough? That's the open question, isn't it? Was Boudica's war doomed from the start, or did it succeed in shifting something permanent? Rome ruled Britain for centuries after, but not without friction, not without the slow erosion of trust. The rebellion became a myth. Rome couldn't contain a thorn it never quite removed. Even when the empire eventually crumbled, people still remembered her name. And now you do too. You lean against a standing stone, one of those tall, weather-worn monoliths that the Romans never bothered to tear down. They didn't understand them, so they left them. Around it, someone has etched new lines, a horse, a chariot, a sunburst. Someone has been drawing the Queen again, not to summon war maybe, just to keep her close. A merchant walks by and scoffs. Superstitions, he mutters. But you know better. Because every empire thinks it will last forever until someone like Boudica reminds them that no one owns history. They only borrow it. You wake to birdsong, gentle, scattered, and strangely cheerful. It doesn't match the landscape. The fields still wear the scars of old battle. The road beside you leads nowhere Rome didn't pave, but the sun is warm and the wind is softer than it has been in days. For the first time, the land feels like it's exhaling. Not healed, not whole, but no longer bleeding. You walk again, this time slower. Your steps are no longer chasing a rebellion, they're following its ghost. You stop at a bend in the path where someone has left a token, a twisted brooch, a strip of dyed fabric, a simple wooden carving of a woman in a chariot. It's not labelled, it doesn't need to be, everyone knows who it's for. Across Britain, the legacy of Boudica begins to shift. The Romans try to suppress the memory. They destroy tribal shrines. They build amphitheatres. They issue coins stamped with the emperor's calm, detached profile, as if that could replace everything they burned. But it's already too late. Boudica's name has seeped into the soil. You pass a Roman schoolhouse where children chant Latin verbs, but in the village just beyond, a mother sings a lullaby to her daughter with Boudica's name hidden in the chorus. Not defiant, not loud, just present, unyielding. And here's your mainstream fact for the night. Despite the suppression that followed, Britain remained one of Rome's most volatile provinces. Rebellions flared in later decades. Roman governors came and went, walls were built, treaties were broken, and by the 3rd century, Britain would begin drifting toward autonomy again. Not through fire, but through fracture. Yet Boudica became the warning Rome could never quite forget. A woman, they said, who dared to lead not just a tribe, but an entire people. Who challenged an emperor with nothing but memory and rage. You reach a crossroads now, an actual one, where 2 Roman roads split in different directions. One leads toward the coast where the ships still dock. The other goes deeper inland into the forests where the old gods still hold court. You hesitate, then turn inland. 'Cause that's where the stories live. You meet an old man on the way, seated beside a cooking fire made of broken Roman bricks. He offers you roasted chestnuts and tells you he once met a warrior who survived the final battle. He couldn't sleep, the old man says. He said the Roman shields made a sound like falling stars. He never could forget it. You ask him what became of the warrior. He vanished, like she did. You ask if he thinks Boudica died in battle.
No, he says, but she stopped being flesh. That much I know.
Historians still argue over what happened to her body. No burial mound has been confirmed, no grave uncovered. Roman accounts say she was buried in secret by her people. Others claim she was cremated in a hidden forest ritual. One theory, fringe but poetic, suggests her body was placed on a boat, sent out into the river, and set alight under a moonless sky. You want to believe that one? It feels right. You reach the edge of a vast moor as the sky turns gold. In the distance, Roman milestones rise like forgotten teeth. But nearer the land is wild, untouched. Here, no villas were built, no roads laid, just stone circles and heather. You imagine the Iceni walking this land barefoot and proud. You imagine Boudica riding through here, not in war, but in peace. And then comes the strange truth. Even Rome eventually rewrote her as a figure of fascination. In time, even they couldn't resist her magnetism. They told tales of her fury, yes, but also of her courage, her charisma, her resolve, a rebel queen who nearly cracked the empire. You sit under a standing stone and let your fingers trace its weathered grooves, one spiral, one arc, one slash like a wheel. Someone drew these here long ago, maybe in her name, maybe just to remember movement in a world that wanted stillness. Later centuries would pull her into their own dramas. In the Middle Ages, she all but vanished from written record, too threatening perhaps. But during the Renaissance, she reappeared in chronicles. By the time of Queen Elizabeth I, Boudica was celebrated as a proto-monarch, a symbol of womanly virtue and fierce patriotism. Never mind the historical rewrites, they needed her. She fit the script. The Victorians took it further. They built that chariot statue near Westminster Bronze and bold claiming her as a symbol of British resistance. Ironically, the very empire that once crushed her rebellion now raised monuments in her image. And here's your quirky detail of the hour her statue faces away from the Houses of Parliament, not toward them. As if even in death she refuses to be ruled. You walk on, the wind tugs gently at your sleeves, you hear birds again, and somewhere far off, maybe just in your imagination, the low rumble of wheels on stone. You follow it into the last fading light, because some stories don't end, they ride. You return once more to the edge of time where memory melts into myth and the firelight flickers just enough to keep history breathing. This last stretch of road feels quieter. The trees part slowly, like they've been waiting for you. The sky has faded to a soft violet and the moon is rising silver and slow, casting long shadows across fields, once filled with spear points and war paint. You're not in Roman Britain anymore, not exactly. You're in the afterimage of it. The place where stories choose what to keep and what to let go. Here, Boudica is no longer a single woman. She's a thread woven through centuries, shifting shape to fit whatever the present needs from the past. In one version, she's a goddess of war and vengeance rising from the moors with fire in her hair. In another, she's a mother mourning her daughters, standing in front of a burning city she never wanted to build. And sometimes, rarely, but always, meaningfully, she's both. You pass a stone well in a field choked with weeds. Locals say the water there turns red during the equinox. Blood memory, one woman told you in a whisper, where the queen once stood. She may not have meant it literally, but it's hard to shake the image. Every corner of this land remembers in its own way. And that's the strange gift of Boudica. She fought for freedom and lost. She tried to burn down an empire and failed. But somehow in losing she became more than victorious. Not militarily, not politically, but in the soft, slow permanence of cultural memory. Because while Rome stayed for centuries, it never fully ruled the imagination of the people it conquered. It ruled their roads, their money, their taxes, but not their stories. You stop in a modern town square where a quiet statue sits, mostly ignored by the shops and buses. It's not grand, it's not even labelled clearly, just a chariot wheel carved into stone. Someone once left fresh flowers there, not a wreath, not a ceremony. Just 5 wildflowers tucked into a corner where pigeons wouldn't notice. You don't know who put them there. You don't need to. Historians still debate whether Boudica truly posed a threat to the Roman Empire's survival in Britain, or if her uprising was always doomed to fail. But the real question isn't whether she could have won, it's why her fight still matters. Why her name has outlived generals, emperors, even entire nations. She wasn't preserved in marble, she was etched into the dirt. And now, as your steps slow to a gentle rhythm and the last mile unwinds before you like a lullaby, you realize this has never just been a story about war. It's a story about limits. How far you can be pushed before you break. What you become when everything is taken from you. And whether a single voice, raw, furious, unwavering, can make an empire pause even for a moment. Here's one final quirky footnote to carry you into the dark in 2003 while digging for a new underground railway tunnel in London. Construction workers stumbled upon a strange pattern in the earth, charcoal pottery shards, scorched foundations. They were standing in the layers left behind by Boudica's fire. 2,000 years later, her rebellion still leaves fingerprints in the clay. You sit on a stone wall now just outside a quiet village, the stars peeking out like old friends. You can't hear the chariots anymore, no drums, no marching feet. Just the soft rustle of wind in grass. But if you close your eyes just a little, you might still feel the earth tremble, not with fear, but with memory. She didn't need to win the war, she just needed to be remembered. So now you can rest, let your breath slow. Let the weight of the empire lift from your shoulders, the sound of hooves fade into the horizon. The battle is over, the ashes have cooled, and the ground at last is still. Whatever you carried with you into this story, whether curiosity, sorrow, or the simple hope for sleep, let it drift away now like mist across the moors. You've walked far, you've seen fire and fury, and a queen who wouldn't kneel, and now the only thing left is stillness, the kind that hums gently beneath the surface, the kind that belongs to the night. You lie back beneath a sky so wide it could swallow armies, and all you can hear is the breeze brushing against tall grass like fingertips across linen. Somewhere in the distance an owl calls once, then falls silent. Even the stars blink slower now, their glow softened by the quiet hum of peace.
No more empire, no more rebellion, just breath, just rhythm, just sleep.
Because in this final silence, the world no longer asks anything of you. You've traveled through fire and stone, past memory and myth, and now finally there's nowhere left to go. The story holds you gently now, cradled in the arms of time. So close your eyes, rest your thoughts, and remember, even the fiercest warriors need a place to lay down their sword. This is yours. Good night.